All right. First and foremost, thank you everyone for joining us for Illinois ITE's webinar on competitive transportation grants. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I'd like to highlight an upcoming event this Friday at UIC. This is going to be our 15th annual Illinois ITE Student Day, where students have the opportunity to connect with professionals and other students in the field of transportation engineering and planning. The day would start off with a career fair, followed by a luncheon for a more informal environment for networking. Professionals don't have to attend the career fair portion of the event to attend the luncheon, so if you're interested, registration is still open. Our speakers today are Tammy Wierciak and Seema Wadia from Metro Strategies Group. Tammy is a principal at Metro Strategies Group with over 20 years of experience. She works with municipalities and regional agencies to lead public engagement, oversee agency coordination, and create winning funding strategies for a variety of projects. She's helped communities secure almost $10 million in funding for major infrastructure projects and priorities. She has extensive experience with the state and federal agreements process, having overseen the administration of funds for local projects during her time at the West Central Municipal Conference. Seema is also a principal at Metro Strategies Group. She has over 20 years of experience working with health, environmental, transportation, and human service agencies during all phases of program management, from planning and implementation to evaluation for a range of issues. She has helped government and nonprofit clients receive over $35 million in approved awards for their projects and is a past board president of the Chicago area chapter for the Grant Professionals Association. Lastly, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please use the Q&A functionality built into Zoom, and we'll try to answer those questions either at the end of the presentation or afterwards as time allows. So without further ado, here are Tammy and Seema.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Just to give you a quick overview of what Seema and I will be covering today, we're going to give you an update on all those new federal programs coming out, the state and regional funding programs that you may be aware of or may not be aware of, but we'll cover those. We are going to go over pursuing appropriate opportunities for your projects, how to leverage multiple funding sources, and how to craft competitive proposals. And then we'll go over questions. We'll leave plenty of time for your questions at the end. And just so that Seema and I know who all are participating today, we are going to do a quick poll. There's 2 questions that should be on your screen. We want to know who you are. If you wouldn't mind sharing what type of organization you work for and what the most important topics are for you to get out of today, that will help Seema and I guide the presentation and our answers. Give it just a few more seconds as I see all the answers populating here. Okay, looks like we have about everyone who's answered. Let me share the results. So it looks like we've got quite a few engineers joining us from engineering firms, as well as some small to medium-sized municipalities and transportation agencies. And then as far as what are the important topics to get out of today's presentation, it looks like coming in close ties here, tips for preparing grant applications, as well as grants that are available for transportation projects. It's the top 2. So I think we've got you covered for today. And we've got project eligibility as well. So I think hopefully we've got everything covered that people were hoping to get out of today's presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Seema, and she's going to kick us off today.
All right, thank you. You might regret wondering what kind of grants are available because I might just talk your heads off here. So, you know, we don't have a lot of time, and there are a lot of new grant programs available, and maybe not like a lot of new programs, but certainly ones that have many different kinds of requirements, many different kinds of eligibility. So again, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act authorized many new programs, and I think many people are interested in kind of what that means. There's a lot of information and presentations out there. A lot of organizations have pushed information out, and then every time a program is released, hey, the mega project is due in two months. Can we apply for it? So I think sorting through some of that can be a little challenging because it takes time. It's not complicated, but it's time consuming reading those NOFOs and getting those pieces out. So a lot of the new programs, the federal guidance is also being developed or has to be developed before they're even rolled out. So not everything has been announced. We'll talk about a few that have not been announced and are upcoming that might be relevant, especially from a transportation grants perspective. And then there have been some changes and expansions to some existing programs as well. Because we have limited time and a lot to cover, we kind of cherry picked what we were going to talk about. So we're going to talk about some of this IIJA discretionary and formula grants for transportation. We're not covering technical assistance and public transportation grants. That in itself is a whole category for transit and bus and all of that. If there is anybody that is curious or kind of wants to know about that, we can see if we can address it in the Q&A. And if not, we can definitely follow up with additional information. We're also going to be talking about some select state, regional, and local programs. I think most people that have been working in the industry, if most of your engineers, are going to be familiar with those. So we won't spend too much time on it, but maybe highlight anything that might be new or different. I also have on this slide a few resources. So CMAP has the IIJA program, and if you've been hearing some of the CMAP kind of presentations, they're really working on regional coordination. Their web page has some upcoming NOFOs and some other resources, links to other resources as well. The White House resource page has been updated and has kind of like an in-website searchable database that's not too bad and fairly easy to use. And then there's something called the Brookings Federal Infrastructure Hub that kind of made its round earlier in the year and end of last year. That's also kind of like an online searchable database and kind of breaks down different programs. So I'm going to just jump right into it. And I want to start off with this one, Multimodal Project Discretionary Grants. When this was released earlier in the year, there was a lot of confusion. And I think a lot of communities looking at that think, oh, can we apply for that? We have multimodal projects. It's not exactly what it seems like. And again, that acronym MPDG, so it almost seems like a name. Essentially, it's a bundle of, and bundle is the wrong word. These were all tied together into one notice of funding opportunity from the perspective that if applicants wanted to apply to more than one project or more than one grant program, they just needed one single application to do it. So that was bundled into one notice. But these are three completely separate grant programs. And they're really for large regional, especially mega and infra. Those are for really large, regionally, nationally significant projects. The Rural Transportation, Surface Transportation Grant Program, that's essentially what it says, really targeting towards regionally significant projects for rural areas outside of urbanized areas that have populations of 200,000 or more. I think the two things I kind of want to call out are take a look at what those minimum project sizes are. Just especially from the perspective of understanding, I have this project, can I apply for this? One very quick way to see is look at that project scale and size. For the mega, we're looking at 100 million, and that's kind of on their small size, what they consider the smaller category of projects. The minimum project size would be 100 million, and the larger minimum would be 500 million. Key focus areas for mega, areas of persistent poverty, historically disadvantaged communities. So if you've been following CMAP updates, 2 applications from the Chicago region were submitted to USDOT. One was the Joint 290 Blue Line Modernization Project, and the other was for improvements to high-speed regional and intercity passenger rail. And that was like a coordinated application from the region and the state, and also included Michigan DOT as one of the applicants. So these are large projects, and they require regional coordination. And if you're an engineer that's involved in large projects, you know, the first step is kind of like working with clients to determine those partnerships and coordination needs. I'm going to touch on two existing programs, RAISE and CRISI, which are continuing projects. The RAISE originally was Tiger like 100 years ago, and it's gone through several different incarnations, and now it's RAISE. This might be more applicable for kind of from a community impact, but again, look at that minimum award size, 5 million for urban areas and 1 million for minimum for rural areas. So these are local regional impacts with a lot of multiple benefit impacts. One thing that's not noted on the slide that, you know, everyone should be aware of is benefit cost analyses are required. They're required for the previous ones we talked about, just previous slide, and these as well. CRISI is looking at rail projects and grade crossing improvements that improve safety, efficiency, and reliability. One of the new things, and I don't recall it coming out, the last notice was that they're really focusing on prioritizing projects to prevent trespassing and reduce injuries and fatalities located across the country in the top 25 counties with the most pedestrian casualties. That also includes Cook County and Illinois, the one county. And then BCA, the benefit cost analysis is a technical analysis that has to be done really well, make sure follow the guidance that's provided by USDOT that has a lot of BCA resources. So whether it's for any of these or the previous ones we talked about. So what are some of the new programs under IIJA? And I keep looking at my time because I could talk probably the entire hour and we'll never get to other pieces. So strengthening mobility and revolutionizing transportation, the SMART grants. I think one thing people wonder is, can I apply for central, signal systems or traffic signal synchronization? So this is focused on demonstration and prototyping grants. And as far as implementation goes, you need to first receive an award as a stage 1 applicant in order to be even considered for implementation. So we're talking about innovative, coordinated, approaches. If you're looking at a small community, like it has to be scalable and replicable and kind of addressing, key issues or needs. And that's, again, the larger regional coordination, multi-jurisdictional coordination is really important for a grant like that and a program like that. The rail crossing elimination program is new and might be of interest to a lot of communities that have rail grade, dangerous rail grade crossings. So the focus is grade separations, track relocations where they're actually closing off one of the crossings, and then corridor-wide grade crossing improvements. So in terms of appropriateness and eligibility, it's again looking at that minimum project cost. Some more new programs. Okay, all of these could potentially be local communities could be eligible and municipalities could be eligible. The Bridge Investment Program, however, is again looking at the scale of those projects. There's two categories. A regular bridge would be the smaller bridge and the large bridge category. So do you have a project that has that many, like it's at least 3.125 million to even, meet the smaller category? All of these are also federal cost share, which I didn't mention before. One of the things where you have new federal programs that show a lower than 80% federal cost share, which is typical. So the mega and infra grants we talked about first have a 60% cost share. So you're responsible for 40% match. Of that 40%, you can use another federal program to match up to 20%. So total federal funding cannot exceed 80%. From those specific grant programs, it might be 60, but you can try and pull another 20 from another federal grant program. Reconnecting Communities pilot program, that's looking at eliminating transportation barriers, especially for historically kind of disconnected communities from an equity perspective, economic kind of benefits and impact perspective. So the equity and justice 40 piece for reconnecting communities is really, really important. So just because there's a project that might eliminate a transportation barrier doesn't mean this is a good fit. And Justice 40 is the federal government's initiative to ensure that at least 40% of certain federal investments, especially like we're talking about transportation investments, flow to disadvantaged communities. And that's kind of that Justice 40 lens. Safe streets and roads for all. It's preventing death and serious injuries for all users. So I know there's a question that came up and we'll answer that in the Q&A. That's looking at safety, crash, and measures to kind of mitigate those death, casualties and serious fatalities and serious injuries. So it has two categories: action plan grants and implementation grants. Technically, municipalities, local governments are eligible, but the way the NOFA was phrased is that they're really looking at multi-jurisdictional regional coordination. And you reading between the lines, like at the most, MPOs might be the best position to apply for those action plan grants, which is what happened with the Chicago region. CMAQ submitted and coordinated a kind of a region-wide planning grant for county level planning. So if that application is awarded, presumably the counties would be able to, do county level planning, and that opens up communities for future implementation grants. So we'll see, where that lands for our region. Going to switch gears a little bit. So we talked about some of the main road and highway type, rail type projects for under IIJA. So EV infrastructure funding, there's been a lot out there about the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, the NEVI program. The federal government released its final rules and regulations for anything funded via federal funds for electric vehicle infrastructure, the minimum standards that have to be met, and that was earlier in the summer. So states were also to submit, and all states, I believe, have submitted in their NEVI plans. Illinois just recently submitted and got it approved as well. So essentially, how is Illinois going to kind of roll out and deploy an electric vehicle infrastructure plan for the state? So I'll touch on that. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but before that, two competitive grant programs that kind of support electric EV charging and infrastructure are the corridor charging infrastructure grants and community charging infrastructure grants. And all of these locations have to be publicly accessible 24/7 per minimum federal standards. The NOFOs for these are anticipated to be spring 2023, the last I saw. So this is kind of a bridge between the discretionary grants and formula programs, continuing with the electric vehicle funding options. So it's a National Electric Vehicle Formula Program that funding is allocated to states as well as MPOs, and the state will be implementing its plan over the next 4 years. There's a lot of information, good information on the state website. If you're looking at, wanted to see the plan and what locations are being prioritized or what they're looking at, IDOT has gone through a public and stakeholder engagement process and intends to continue going through that as it goes through implementation. The goal is in the first 2 years, really look at building out alternative fuel corridors in Illinois, looking at proposed siting stations, and they got technical kind of resources to help identify those. And then lessons learned for improving the program and understanding what else needs to be done. There will also be funding allocated to MPOs. So anything that's coming to our region would potentially supplement existing programs. Since it's EV charging, some of our surface transportation and kind of congestion mitigation air quality programs, it opens up new eligibility categories under IIJA for EV related projects. The carbon reduction program is another formula program. Sorry, I'm kind of like, this is what happens with all the different IIJA programs. So National EV Formula Program, that goes to the state. The carbon reduction program is where it's state and MPO allocations, and that's what will supplement potentially existing programs like ITEP and CMAQ. So the carbon reduction program is being rolled out. The state strategies are due to the federal government by next fall, and then kind of similar to like how the NEVI strategy and plan is being deployed and implemented, how the state formula funds kind of get implemented will be dependent on the state plan to do that. The last one I kind of want to talk about here as far as that resilience, sustainability, EV kind of aspect is the energy efficiency and conservation block grant. This is through the DOE, and hopefully I'm not misspeaking here, but the energy efficiency and conservation block grant was last deployed, for lack of a better word, during the ARA funding process. So I'm not sure if any of you recall that about 10 plus years ago. So block grants, it's formula grants, which will be allocated based on population. Communities that are at least 35,000 in population are going to get a minimum of $75,000. And then anything left over is going to be divided based on population. Communities that aren't eligible for the formula funding, there will be a competitive discretionary program for those. So if it's presumably under 35,000 and any other kind of non-eligible categories might be eligible for the competitive grants. So what's interesting about this is that, you know, specifically transportation related projects could fall under this. The guidance says bike lanes and ped walkways. I don't know if it's going to be very specific or how they will identify those, but traffic signal synchronization, financial incentive programs for EV infrastructure, changing out street lights and traffic signals to LED lights as well. In addition to a number of non-transportation related funding under this block grant. Other formula programs, the Bridge Formula Program. So the Bridge Investment Program we talked about, that might be like, the focus might be too big in terms of project scale. The Bridge Formula Program is an option for communities with smaller scale projects. That's going to be administered through IDOT. There should be a notice in December, January, and an annual process with the with IIJA. The cost share, IIJA provides guidance for cost share for on-system bridges at 80-20, and then 100% funding for off-system local bridges. So that's something to keep an eye out, and you know, most likely it will be first in announced through an IDOT circular letter. Protect is a resiliency formula program. There's going to be state-led formula programs for kind of a statewide approach to resiliency improvements, and then competitive grants as well. I don't have a timeline on when that might come out and what those competitive grants will look like, but most likely I imagine it would be something like the Safe Streets and Roads for All, where that regional coordination is really important. Multi-jurisdictional coordination is really important to apply for something like this. So with IIJA, that's all I'm going to cover for the IIJA. If there's anybody that has questions about other grant opportunities you've heard of, please just pop that in the chat or the Q&A. And we'll see what we can do to address that. I'm going to take a little bit of a break from the federal funding. Well, not quite. So different pots of funding that might be federal, either through legislator directed funding, or you know, through the state or the region. So going through the whole federal grants process can be very time consuming. An option might be to look at congressionally directed spending, which is essentially earmarks. They've been going on for the last 2 years, where legislator, House and Senate offices have kind of invited their communities to apply for funding. They get to nominate a certain number of projects, and then those projects ultimately have to go through a review and approval process by each of the appropriations committees or the relevant committees in charge. They have tried to make it as transparent as possible with very clear guidance and what's required. It's still federal funding, so anything funded through earmarks is still subject to federal regulations. It's typically announced at the beginning of the calendar years, and it's a very fast process. So what we tell people is, you know, you want to start a year ahead, reach out to your legislator offices, talk to them about a project. They'll have a good idea by now in terms of how competitive it is, does it kind of make sense or not. Each year, the guidance might also get updated. This past year, there was a big focus on the community engagement and community support for the project. Equity, resilience, all of that, environmental justice, those are all important lenses too. If it's transportation projects, they have to be in the TIP. So that's something to keep in mind, because again, it's federal funds and a lot of the funding may come from accounts that have those requirements and regulations in place. The member directed funding is at the state level. So it is possible to get state capital grants as lump sum or line item appropriations. And this process is generally done through the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in terms of the grant award and grant agreement process. But this is something, it's reaching out to your elected officials to talk about the priority projects, why it's important, what the need is, and to see if there's options for any kind of line item appropriations or a grant through DCO as a capital grant. All right, we're going to kind of move into the state, regional, and local funding. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides because I'm going to assume that most people are familiar with this, with these programs. There's nothing really new. Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program to fund bike, ped, streetscape projects, enhancement projects that support a transportation benefit or need. The one thing from this last year is that the funding limit was increased from 2 million to 3 million. The last couple of calls, bike projects can be funded at 100% with kind of a state allocation too. Safe routes to school is something that has been more regular recently. That is also still federal pass-through funding. And there might be some program updates for Safe Routes to School. Communities can apply for infrastructure grants, schools can apply for planning grants. IDA is planning to hold some listening tours to kind of get some, I guess, like talk about this project, get some feedback, and develop a technical assistance program really to improve the program and enhance it and look at planning and implementation coordination. The Highway Safety Improvement Program through IDA federal funds addresses severe injuries and fatalities on public roads, and a BCA is required for that one. Few other programs, the Illinois Commerce Commission Grade Crossing Protection Fund. So the thing to know about that is that there is a process, and if anyone has questions, we should be able to answer some questions related to that. But it basically funds safety improvements at highway rail crossings. If a community is awarded funds, there is a process, a very specific process and requirements they have to go through. And it's really important to keep that coordination going and meet all those requirements because it can quickly take you off track. IDOT Truck Access Route Program and IDOT Economic Development Program, both supporting that economic development piece. The truck access route very specifically supporting and helping communities upgrade roads to accommodate 80,000-pound truckloads. And then the economic development program improvements for access to, those types of facilities and tourism development. So the main thing to know with the economic development program is the metric is creation and retention of permanent full-time jobs. So if a project is to be funded through that, it needs to show that's going to happen and document that. CMAQ, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, the Transportation Alternatives Program, and the Surface Transportation Shared Fund Program. Okay, so the first to all three should be, the calls for projects will be early next year. CMAQ, it may be supplemented by some of the formula funding, like through carbon reduction program that, eligibility is similar. It would, and new eligibility for EV related projects. The TAP program might get additional funding. Again, carbon reduction program could be used to supplement that. I haven't had a chance to kind of confirm that or look into that, but it's possible there might be increased funding for these programs. And then the thing about the Transportation Alternatives Program, it's like the same pot of funding that ITEP enhancement programs come from, but the TAP is really focused on looking at the Northeastern Illinois Regional Greenways and Trails Plan and making sure that gets completed. The shared program is for regionally significant transportation program projects. So it's being updated a little bit. And there's some clarifying kind of language and some updates that should be finalized over the next few weeks. It's kind of gone through the approval process. I think the one thing that may have changed from last time is that total project costs, well, it was always more than 5 million, but have 3 or more local partners instead of 2 or more local partners. That should include at least one municipality. And then phase 1 funding would be, you know, available for very high need communities. And then we have surface transportation through the councils of mayors. That's a continuing program. The RTA access to transit. So RTA funds communities that have projects in an identified plan, potentially a local plan that to improve access to transit facilities. It could be like pedestrian biking improvements, anything that helps increase ridership, bus and rail ridership, train ridership. So the RTA bundles these approved projects and submits them to CMAQ, and that's how it gets funded. And the local share for that is split with RTA, the non-federal share. Cook County Invest in Cook is a great option for using as a local match for federal funds and really helping with maybe some of those initial planning studies or feasibility studies or phase 1 studies. Cook County funds 1 phase at a time. So that's how it's been so far. And then the last few programs, Community Development Block Grant, the MWRD Green Infrastructure Grant Opportunity Program for green alleys or green parking lots, and the Illinois EPA Green Infrastructure Grant Opportunity for green alleys and green parking lots. The green infrastructure projects, of course, fund more than just green alleys and green pavement, but it is an option to think about. CDBG is a flexible pot of money. The main thing is, though, it needs to benefit a low to moderate income area, which can be verified on maps. But CDBG is the one program, federal program, that could be potentially used to match, used as a non-federal match. So there is some flexibility there depending on eligibility. Okay, so I know I ran through a lot of programs. I'm going to just kind of switch gears now and talk about like some of the key questions that need to be asked in terms of, especially through the lens of applying for new IIJA funding and, you know, these new funding pots, like thinking about where you are in the planning or project development phase. If it's still early, look maybe at local options, look at local funds, and then look at other local funding opportunities rather than thinking about federal funding. Scale of the project. We talked about minimum project size and minimum project award and minimum project cost. So most NOFOs will give you a minimum award, but do the math. If it's an 80%, then calculate what does that mean? What does the actual total project cost have to be, just to make sure, you know, does it even work? Is it in the tip? You know, how long is it going to take to do the benefit cost analysis? You might have, it might be eligible, it might be a great project, but if you can't get a good benefit cost analysis, then you just don't have the time, does it make sense to do it this year? And then the non-federal share is really important. Like a lot of the programs, they want it in writing. Yes, I am committing to support the city of ABC $50 million, right? Well, not $50 million, but like $500,000, say. So some of that has to be committed and secured. Obligation expenditure timelines are something that's important to meet. Usually these are in the NOFOs. These 2 links are really good for you to look at as well if you're interested in more of the transportation federal grants. Some of them are US DOT has created this Navigator website for local communities, just really to walk them through the federal process and understand, does it make sense to apply or not apply, and what that post-award commitment looks like. And at the end of the day, to kind of step back and, you know, like the bigger picture, like don't forget the bigger picture piece. First of all, hitting all of these key criteria of support, partners, coordination, and you know, whether you're ready or not, and also the impacts and outcomes. Can you demonstrate and can you quantify some of these outcomes? Equity, resilience, environmental justice, those are really important. Accessibility, we didn't talk about like the ADA piece, but accessibility, all of these are like part and parcel of the impact when you're looking at federal funds and whether they would make for good projects. All right. I know I went over my time, so my apologies to Tammy.
I'll speak really, really fast. So CMA laid out a lot of great projects for you, or grant opportunities for you. But what does that mean if she said there's a limit of how much money you can get and your project's double that? Most communities cannot, even if it's a 20% match, it's still going to be $5 million. They may not have $5 million laying around. The good news is, you can combine a lot of these sources if you know how. Take the time to review and say, okay, CMA said some of these federal funds can match each other, or what elements apply to each grant. You may have a huge corridor project that has streetscape in it, that has drainage improvements in it, that has road improvements, that has safety elements. You can break all those out and apply to each pot of money to help fund each separate section to build a whole funding package. You do need to look at those grant requirements, because if you don't have phase 1 done and it requires phase 1 to apply for phase 2, like, you have to have those meet the minimum requirements to do this. And timing is critical. While things are annual cycles, a lot of times you don't want to be waiting for the next grant application or have funding hold up your project when you have other funding that might need to be spent by a certain time, or could be rescinded. And even though it's one big project, you still need to make sure that you're applying for the elements, for the narrative, for the requirements, the priorities for the program that you're submitting to. MWRD doesn't care what road improvements you're doing. They want to hear just about the drainage and detention and how you're going to impact flooding. STP doesn't want to hear about that. They're focused on the road improvements and transportation elements. So make sure you're taking the time to submit a unique application with unique materials that speak to what you're applying for. And so as you're building all these funding sources and pulling everything together, it's really helpful to kind of, Seema and I make these great little charts for our projects. And this is the sample one where we're starting to pull together, okay, it's a $100 million project for a community. They don't have that. So, it's got some streetscape elements to it. Okay, that could cover X amount of dollars. It's got, they don't even have money to get off the ground. So maybe Invest and Cook can help them get that seed money for phase 1. There's bike ped elements. So let's go after, the TAP program. Can we talk to the Council of Mayors for the STP program, CDB? So we start to pull this all together, and that way it helps us track when we need to be applying, when we need to be moving stuff, and preparing for materials. Here's another sample, a simpler one that's even, these don't have to be complicated, but you need to start pulling out the different elements so that you can start thinking creatively. One size fits all isn't going to work on your big projects. One program probably is not going to fund everything. So what elements can we pull out, and how much of that can go towards each project or each funding element? So these are just some sample things to help you organize your funding thoughts and the key details and your timelines for when you need to pull stuff together and what you're applying for what program. Some really critical things to think about. A lot of federal funding sources say you can't match other federal funding sources. So make sure that you're not combining that and showing STP is matching another federal source. You're going to be dead in the water if that's the case. Something that sounds silly. However, on one project I did, we had so many funding sources going, the community looked at me cross-eyed when it came time to start to build, because now we're invoicing ICC through IDOT with certain IDOT forms for this element. We're billing IDOT through a different program for this funding source. We have to send, get reimbursed through this program, and we have to send this program a canceled check. So, whoever's going to be doing that invoicing and tracking at your community for your project, sit down, go through each source, what's getting billed to each source. You don't want to get rejected because you accidentally sent the streetscape element to ICC for reimbursement. It's going to take some coordination on that end. It's really critical that those pieces are very organized and tracked and sent to the right places. Seema and I have both talked about your narratives. A good strong narrative that speaks to the program you're applying to. If you can talk about how many lives you're going to save, not just that it's a good underpass, but it's how many people have died there, how many people have gotten stuck on the tracks. You've got to include those key details because these funding partners may not be familiar with your area. They may not know your project, so they may not know how important it is. And then grant requirements. Make sure you are hitting what's required of the grant, what's eligible under that grant in your application. Don't submit the whole package with all. They may want to see the total project cost, but they only want in the breakdown what you're applying for under their program and what their dollar amounts are. And then this is just kind of a case study that we put together, some projects that we've worked on where we have bundled these elements. It's very doable if you put the time and energy into it. It takes a lot of energy, but you can do it. We started with Invest and Cook, got phase 1 done, added the STP fund. Once you get a little bit of money, you can show that the region's committed to your project. You can show that you've got other funding partners. That STP program, every couple of year cycle, you get into that program. That gives you a good chunk of money to get your road funds. And again, other agencies are starting to get excited that they can be a part. They can invest, $200,000 would be a part of a $5 million project. Agencies like that, they can say they are part of a big corridor, and you can start to build those things a little bit easier. And like I said, separate out your funding elements, separate out who you're applying to what for. Make sure you're very specific about that. They can kick you out and reject your application because you accidentally included streetscape elements that weren't an eligible item. And then crafting competitive proposals. I know this was something a couple people mentioned that they were interested in. How to make your application stand out, how to be, the one that people want to fund. That impact in your narrative, were you explicitly clear that you're going to save, so many lives? You've got how many cars traveling on this road? You're connecting to how many schools? What are the elements that are a priority to that agency? Make sure you're hitting all those with some key facts, some key benefits. If you can show that there's a regional benefit to your project, or it's going to help surrounding communities. You've got kids who go to school in your community from multiple towns, and this will make it safer for them to get there. That's a plus. You want to make sure you're highlighting that. Again, no one's going to know outside of your community that your school district serves multiple communities. Are you hitting that funder's priorities? If it's a Cook County funded project, are you hitting key points from the long range transportation plan? Spell it out. You are helping freight. You are helping move the region. Throw some of their own key phrases back at them. Work those into your narrative. Support for your project. Did you have a public meeting? How many people attended? Write it down, show support, include as an attachment the sign-in sheet, pictures from the meeting. If you can get letters of support from business leaders, from people that might be impacted from the project, from your local legislators, those are all great things to have. Is your community invested in the project? Are you going to build it regardless of whether you get funded? That shows that it's a priority, that you're going to move forward regardless. That gets you points. I know it says an 80-20 match. Can you maybe put in a little bit of extra money? That gets you additional points in your application. Can you do a 25% match, a 30% match? Or maybe you've got other funding sources, so now it's a 50-50 match. That agency doesn't have to put in as much. Are you ready to go? Have you started phase 1? If you're touching an IDOT road, everyone knows now we've got to coordinate with IDOT. Have you contacted your local district office and asked for a letter saying that at the bare minimum, the district's not opposed to your project? Their agencies are going to see that. They want to know that you're not going to get tied up waiting for permits for right away, that there's not going to be opposition somewhere down the line. And then again, application requirements. Do you have enough time to get everything done that they're going to require of you? Did they ask for a resolution? Do you have time to get that on your board agenda? You want to submit quality proposals. Don't just throw stuff out there to throw stuff out there. A lot of these things come around more than once. So if you can, if you know it's an annual cycle and you're not ready, it may make sense just to wait. And we can't harp on the narratives enough. An engineering narrative is not going to cut it. A lot of people reviewing your applications are not engineers. While it's critical to say what you're doing engineering wise, it's even more critical to say what the benefit is, to spell it out, to give some numbers to it. Tell that story. What, where, when, why, how. Tell it. You're limited in characters a lot of times, so make sure you're trying to get in as much as that as you can. And we have 2 start immediatelys here. Just because some of these programs don't have a call out, just because there's not an open, it doesn't mean you can't start now preparing for them. If you know it's an annual cycle, that it's going to be coming, start asking your legislators for those letters. There's nothing worse than waiting at 4:50 and it's due at 5 o'clock for that last legislator's letter and they say it's coming, it's coming. You don't want to be waiting. If you can get those things in now and get them saved, do it. It'll save you a lot of stress. Believe Seema and I have been there waiting and it's very stressful if you are waiting for something silly, but you have to have it. Data requirements. Can you start building your cost estimates now? Look up your census data. Census data, your community snapshot, all that information should be in every narrative. If you're a low-income community, a diverse community, work that into your narrative. Start pulling that stuff. And then again, you're going to need that detailed budget cost estimate. You're going to need realistic timelines. You're going to need to know, does it pass the smell test? They're going to look at it to see if it's passed the smell test. They don't want people submitting stuff that hasn't started, doesn't have phase 1 done, and you say you're going to get it done in a year and a half. Everyone knows you can't get agreements that quick. So be realistic. So just in summary, prepare for your projects now. Start pulling stuff. If you can get in a local or regional plan, get it in the TIP, get it in a community's capital improvement plan. Do you have a bike plan? Any evidence of that you can show that it helps show that it's important to the community. It helps show that you've done your due diligence and your homework and that your residents want it. Another thing is a lot of these agencies are very nice people. Give them a call once that NOFO comes out. They're happy to answer questions. They'd rather you not apply because you called and find out you're not eligible than have to review 50 applications that aren't eligible. They'll help you through it. They'll give you pointers. They'll give you tips. They'll give you tips after the fact and tell you why you did, what made you miss out on points. Call them up, find those things out. They will talk to you. Look at some things that they've previously awarded. That'll give you some tips on to what type of projects they want. They may say they're funding everything, but it's all bike ped. Apply for bike ped. And those webinars can be great places to ask questions. You'll hear some of their priorities that may not be listed in the NOFO. You'll hear them talk about things that they're trying to implement. That'll help you with your narrative. That'll help guide you in what you write. And then on occasion, you get those questions that say, hey, we need a little bit more detail. We need a better design piece. We need something. Send it right away. I've had communities that, oh, we did get an email from that agency asking for that. We didn't know we were supposed to do something with it. Well, now you just missed out. They're asking for something because they're interested in you. So make sure you're responsive and you get them what they need. So we did it. We spoke fast, but we're here to answer your questions. I know we already have one in the chat. Seema, I'm going to push this over to you for the CRISI funds. Are quiet zone projects eligible for those funds?
So if it's improvements, those capital improvements that we, saw kind of in that CRISI piece, then yeah, it could be for an existing or future or a potential quiet zone, but not necessarily to establish the quiet zone. I'm not sure, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything else in the, so is it a project within a quiet zone could be eligible if it's meeting those eligible needs, and a project for potential help establish in the sense of A future quiet zone, yes, but not to actually create the quiet zone. And please let me know if you had a follow-up question to that.
Come on, Quizzer, there's new federal programs. Quizzer, ask your questions. Or we did such a great job, we answered them all already.
Or people were multitasking.
That should be the final polling question. What percentage of the presentation did you listen to, or how many phone calls did you take? Emails answered?
No, please feel free.
There was one, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to mention, there were a couple of people who were interested in getting the slides for this presentation. We will have that available. We'll reach out after this webinar. I do also want to note that we are recording this webinar and it'll be up on our Illinois ITE YouTube channel. Let's see, any more questions? This would include railroad crossing improvements such as gates and warning lights, etc. So I think that's a follow-up.
Yes, so yes, that would be eligible, but then it's looking at that total minimum project cost and just making sure the scale of the project was appropriate to what the Christine NOFO is looking at. That is a pretty competitive one as well. So like things like grade separations are really fundable from an impact perspective. So if it was more than crossing improvements, then yes. If it's just what you mentioned, the crossing improvements, then it's possible that it wouldn't be very competitive, or likely it wouldn't be very competitive.
Gotcha.
Then we have another question. How far in advance do you suggest that we need to allocate to apply and be a competitive candidate?
So I think I'm understanding allocate local funds for.
I'm guessing when should they start the process?
Okay.
There's no one size fits all, because there are some applications we've all seen, that are simple Google forms. Some of those congressional ones are even simple Google forms that, as long as you have your total costs and things, they're not going to take you a month to do. But if it's a benefit cost analysis that has to go into it, if there's a resolution, you probably need a month, at least a month, to get things on board packets. And if it needs to go on the board packet, does it need the cost in it? So when do you need to start your design work to have some decent cost numbers to include in that?
And I would say for those federal grants, at least 2 months. I mean, I know it usually comes down to less than 4 weeks, but it's going to be rushed. Getting all of those numbers in, getting the support letters in, the commitments in. So at least 6 to 8 weeks minimum.
And if you're looking at detention or stormwater projects, and you're going to be applying in the next year, if there's a rainstorm or a rain event, go out and take some photos, start documenting now, because in the 2 months leading up to your application cycle, we may have a dry spell and you might not have any good photos, and they require photos in some of those as evidence. So yeah, it's never too early, let's put it that way.
Okay, there is one more question about the match. Since you could get funded for only a portion of the request, is it a good strategy to propose a larger match than required?
So for federal funds, it might be careful what you ask for, because then typically if you're saying you have a larger match, then and you get the money, then you may be required to, they're going to want to hold you to that larger match. Do communities do it? Yeah, but not if you don't have a backup for that, then I wouldn't recommend it as a good strategy.
And if you're requesting money for like a phase 2 without having any thought on how you're going to pay for construction, I'm going to throw out the warning that federal funds can come with some penalties if you don't end up building the project. They may ask for their money back. Like, be prepared. You are committing to build this project if you take money, or advance it, or you better have a good feasibility reason why you can't proceed. And it can't be financial. It has to be something crazy financial, like right of way would cost $100 million, and that makes it a no build. But yeah, be careful what you wish for.
Okay, I think we're at a good stopping point. We have no more additional questions. Thank you again, Tammy and Seema, for sharing your time and expertise with us. This concludes the webinar on competitive transportation grants. Again, thank you to our speakers and to all our attendees.
Thank you.
Thank you.